The new Hearthstone expansion Titans is now out, and here are the best decks so far. The first deck I'm showcasing is Nature Shaman. This might be one of the best decks that you could be playing, especially because it's not a super expensive deck. There's only 3 legendaries, which can be a little expensive for some, but if you have the dust, I would highly recommend it. Flash of Lightning is a really powerful card, and when it's paired with a card like Crash of Thunder and a bunch of spell damage from Bioluminescence, it can absolutely roll your opponent before they even have a chance. I won games on turn 5, 6, and 7 with this deck because the mana cheating, the amount of damage you can do is absolutely absurd. And if that's not enough damage for you, you also still have the Horn of the Windlord, and of course with the new card Turn the Tides, you give yourself a bonus attack damage, which means you basically have your make your own Doomhammer. I have also won games by doing 18 damage to the face in 1 turn with the weapon. It is a pretty gross deck, but I have a feeling that Shaman will be one of the top contenders, and as the deck gets even further optimized, this will be a top tier deck. It turns out with Sif Mage, you are in a pretty great spot. I didn't go against a ton of aggro, but I've seen a ton of people have success with this archetype because of Sif. There is a ton of different ways to cast spell schools in this deck. You already have a ton in the deck with Fire, with Flame Geyser, I hardly know her, a bunch of Frost with Cold Case, Solid Alibi, Frozen Touch. You also have a Prismatic Elemental that can discover a different spell school, as well as Discovery of Magic. And it all comes together in such a great way to end the game with Sif, where I was able to get spell damage +7 and kill my opponent from full health, and there was nothing they could do about it. The Titan's also kind of good in here. It's like an alternative win condition. Maybe your opponent doesn't have a way to deal with it, and it lets you just get some cheeky damage in, or it makes their cards cost more. If your metagame is super aggressive, I'm not sure if this is the best version of it, but Sif Mage is probably here to stay. Black Rock and Roll Warrior got a ginormous upgrade in this expansion, all thanks to Steamy Guardian. All right, this card, because your only spell in the deck is Black Rock and Roll, you have a very consistent way of getting it on turn 5 or even before it. Because Steam Guardian does discount it if it's a fire spell, and good for you, Black Rock and Roll is a fire spell. You can go Steam Guardian into Black Rock and Roll, and then you kind of just snowball from there. If you play this deck in Festival of Legends, you probably know that you did not have a consistent way to draw this, and a lot of your wins or losses would be basically, did I draw this card or not? But you no longer have to worry about that. And because they added a bunch of different ways for Warrior to get some life, most notably the Minotaurine, you are pretty safe after you play that, even though you spent 4 mana do nothing, or even 5 mana do nothing. I mean, this is a pretty old deck from Festival of Legends, but they got so much better because of just one single card, and I have a feeling this deck will actually be pretty good. As much as I hate to showcase it, Hunter also is really good. I showcase the aggro package because at least it plays a little bit more new cards, such as the Awaking Tremors and the Observer of Myths. But honestly, Hound Hunter is also good. I just didn't really want to show it because it's kind of lame. I was just talking about how with Mage, if you're going against aggro, you might get rolled, and this is like the primo aggro deck. It fights really aggressively in the early game with a bunch of the new cards. Also, Foul Egg and Nerubian Egg into Yelling Yodeler is a really good package. But your late game finisher is absolutely insane because of the new Titan that Hunter got, giving you a 5/3 weapon that makes you immune while attacking, which is basically 15 damage to the face. I don't think I really have to talk about Hunter here. I have a feeling that most of you probably know how good Hunter is in the early days of an expansion, and that's why I'm showcasing it right now. If you want some cheeky wins with Hunter, feel free to use this. I won a ton of games before my opponent even had a chance to fight. Druid is also looking really good in the early days of the Titans expansion, mainly because Druid is just usually good in every Hearthstone expansion. It's nothing surprising. It takes the hero power package from Festival of Legends with Groovy Cat and Free Spirits, but it basically improves on it because now you're running Ignis, which allows you to run a custom weapon, and Disciple of Enar really helps you out in the mid game because you get to cast Nourish for 5 mana, which means get 2 mana crystals back and draw 3 cards, and that's pretty great. It also is really good with Drum Circle, but mainly in the juice of this deck, and it feels so good to play, is with Eonar and Freya. Both of them allow you to go for insane late game finishers, such as maybe you run out of stuff and then you draw all your cards and now your opponent's sad, or you just copy your board and kill your opponent. Either or works. There's also a surprising amount of generation in this deck because of Lifebinder's Gift, so there's also outs even if you don't have enough damage in your actual deck to finish. The thing about Druid is that there's probably going to be a lot of different ways to actually end up building it, so this may not be the optimal version, but this is probably pretty close to the package that Druid will end up having in Titans. I'm basically showing Relic Demon Hunter here because of the one new card that is added to the deck, which is Jotun the Eternal, which is for the rest of the game, cast a copy of the first spell you draw each turn at enemies, which is very, very good. So if you end up drawing this in the early game, not only does it make your overall game plan just that much stronger, but if you cast a relic, it improves it, which means your relics get better and all your other spells are also really, really good. And the benefit with Demon Hunter is that it's already a pretty refined deck and you're just adding basically one new card to make it that much better. I'm not super excited to show this, but Demon Hunter doesn't really have anything else going for it at the moment. It just turns out that this is just a very, very good card. I'm not a huge fan of the Warlock archetype that they have provided, but I can't lie that the archetype is pretty great because it's already a pretty refined deck from the previous expansion, just with a couple of pretty great add-ons into the deck. Forge of Wills is a very good card to put into the deck if you play a lot of meatballs. Obviously, the new Titan is a really good win condition against a slower archetype where you just constantly flood the board with imps, but your general win condition will be the Amorphous Slime, potentially into the Ravenous Kraken to get your undead boys like Thaddeus, or the Flesh Behemoth to win the game. Loken, Jailer of Yogg-Saron is also one of the best cards Warlock got, because if you play this on turn 6 with Forge of Wills already on the board, maybe you get Thaddeus and next thing you know, you have two 11/11s on board and one of them has Rush, and that's probably going to be enough. I'm just not a huge fan of the archetype personally. It feels like it's Barnes Warlock, but if you like playing Warlock and you're interested in playing the class for this expansion because you open their legendaries, here you go. Mech Rogue looks pretty good in the early days of this expansion, mainly because of the Lab Constructor card. If you don't really have an answer to the first mech your opponent plays, it can kind of snowball from there. Now, I do want to mention that I personally don't think that Mech Rogue is really going to be an archetype as Titan continue forward. The bigger problem with it is that people will optimize their decks and this will probably fall to the wayside. It goes without saying that Mech Rogue is a pretty aggressive deck. You basically want to start on board immediately and continue from there to snowball to your victory. You could do some pretty cool stuff with Mimram the Mastermind and get a lot of random gadgets, or you could focus on Voltron Prime to try to win the game. You definitely need to snowball. If you're not snowballing with Mech Rogue, it might be a little tough. There's also this early version of Miracle Rogue. I'm not really sure how great this is going to end up being as the expansion keeps on going, but I figured I would showcase it in case you guys want to try a different rogue deck other than Mech. This one I had a ton of fun with. This was the Jade Priest, basically with the Astral Automatons with a ton of control. This deck was actually really fun and I felt like it's really good against specific matchups. The bigger problem with this deck is if you don't get a decent early game, it can feel a little weird. So some games you will just lose because you just did absolutely nothing. If you played J Druid back in the day, the reason why J Druid was so good was because not only did it have early game control tools like Priest does, but it also has ramp. So if your opponent wasn't playing aggro, you could just ramp, where Priest doesn't have that. So it's very important that you either go for the Love Everlasting or you go for the Astral Automaton kind of build. I'm not really a Priest player, but I did play it for the first 2 hours of this expansion. It could probably be optimized like most control decks will as the expansion continues on. But if you're looking to play Priest, I would highly recommend it. But this is it's a pretty expensive deck. Last but not least is the Plague Death Knight. This archetype is looking pretty good for what it is. I think this archetype will be actually a lot better as people optimize the list and figure out what is the right cards and what isn't. But generally the game plan here is pretty simple. You play the cards that shuffle plagues in your opponent's deck and then you hope they die, and that's pretty much it. Prison of Yogg-Saron is in this deck because sometimes you do need a board clear because you're too unholy and one frost. You don't really have those. The longer the game goes on, the more interesting it gets because the plagues can go pretty wild. I hope you guys are enjoying Titans. Make sure you subscribe if you want to see more content on Hearthstone.